The air was thick with the scent of fresh paint and old memories as he stepped into the small, dimly lit apartment. It wasn't much, but for him, it was a sanctuary, a place where he could start over, away from the bitterness of his recent divorce. The walls, though aged, seemed to whisper a promise of new beginnings. A fresh start was exactly what he needed. He had moved into the apartment just a few days ago, a decision made on a whim after the finalization of his divorce. The pain was still fresh, the weight of betrayal heavy on his shoulders. But he was determined not to let it define him. The apartment, though old and a little run-down, had a certain charm. It was quiet, peaceful, and that's all he wanted right now. The building was a relic from another time, one of those places where the hallway lights flickered and the stairs creaked underfoot. But there was something about it that made him feel like he had found a place that could offer him solace. It was the kind of place where he could retreat and lick his wounds in solitude. His neighbor, though, was an enigma. She had introduced herself as Anastasia when they first met in the hallway. She was a little shy, a bit reserved, but always polite. From the first moment he saw her, he couldn't help but notice how her pale blue eyes seemed to reflect a sadness he couldn't place. But that wasn't why he found himself drawn to her. It was a subtle way she seemed to always be around when he needed to speak to someone. The way her presence, though quiet, was calming. Their encounters were brief at first. An exchange of pleasantries in the hallway, an occasional wave when they crossed paths. He knew she worked long hours at a nearby cafe, and whenever he was home, it seemed like she was always at work or out running errands. But he never minded. He wasn't looking for a friend, let alone a romantic interest. He was simply trying to rebuild a life from the wreckage of the one he had lost. And yet, something about Anastasia kept him intrigued. It wasn't that she was exceptionally beautiful or outgoing. No, there was something more to her, something deeper. There were moments when their eyes met across the hallway, and in those brief seconds, he felt as if he could see through her. But when he tried to speak with her more, she would always retreat behind that wall of reserve. It wasn't until a few weeks later that things began to change. As the days went by, the distance between him and Anastasia began to shrink, slowly but surely. He found himself bumping into her more often in the hallway, exchanging awkward smiles and short conversations. She would always ask about how he was settling into the apartment, and he would respond with a vague fine or getting there. But despite the brief exchanges, there was an unspoken connection that seemed to grow with every passing day. It wasn't something overt, just a sense that they were both drifting through life with quiet understanding. One evening, as he returned from a grocery run, he noticed her sitting on the small stoop in front of their building, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees. The air was cool, but she didn't seem to mind the chill. Her gaze was distant, almost as if she were staring off into a world of her own. It was then that he made a decision. "Hey, Anastasia," he called out, his voice a little hesitant. "You okay?" She looked up, startled for a moment, then offered him a faint smile. "Oh, yeah, just thinking." "Thinking?" He raised an eyebrow, curious. "About what?" She seemed to hesitate before responding, almost as if choosing her words carefully. "I don't know, just everything. Life. Things don't always turn out the way you expect them to, you know?" He nodded, understanding more than he let on. "Yeah, I get that." There was a brief silence between them before he asked, "Do you want to talk about it?" She shook her head, a small laugh escaping her lips. "Not really. Not now. Anyway, maybe another time." That was the first time they had talked for more than a few seconds. And while the conversation wasn't particularly deep, it left him with a sense that Anastasia was not just the quiet, reserved neighbor he had thought her to be. There was a complexity to her, a quiet turmoil behind those pale blue eyes. As the days went on, their interactions became more frequent. She would sometimes drop by his apartment, usually in the evening after a long day at work. They would talk, watch a movie, or just sit in silence, each caught up in her own thoughts. He began to notice little things about her. The way she would nervously play with the sleeve of her jacket when she was deep in thought. The way her lips would tremble when she tried to smile. There was a sadness in her that she never fully revealed, but it was always there, just beneath the surface. Then one night, something changed. The strange occurrences continued, and they seemed to grow more frequent as time went on. It started with the faint sounds in the middle of the night, whispers and murmurs that seemed to seep through the thin walls of his apartment. He thought at first that it was just the usual creaking of the building, settling in the cool night air, but then the sound started to take on a more distinct shape. He would lie in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, listening as the whispers grew clearer. At first, he couldn't make out the words, but there was an unmistakable quality to them. Voices low and hushed, as though someone was speaking in a language that wasn't quite English, or perhaps even a voice that was trying to remain hidden. It sounded almost like a conversation happening behind a door, but the walls were thick, and there was no one in the hallway at that hour. It was always the same time, too, around 2 a.m. The voice would start out faint and then slowly grow louder, sometimes followed by soft footsteps, the faintest sound of furniture scraping against the floor. There were times when he swore he heard what sounded like a door opening and closing softly, followed by a muffled sob or a quiet, desperate whisper. At first, he tried to dismiss it as nothing. After all, buildings were old and the walls were thin. It could easily be his mind playing tricks on him in the dead of night. But one night, as the sound persisted, he found himself unable to ignore it. He couldn't help it. He had to know what was happening. He stood up from his bed, his heart pounding in his chest, and made his way to the hallway. He moved quietly, his footsteps muffled by the old wooden floors beneath him. The apartment door to Anastasia's flat was slightly ajar. It was odd. She was always so careful about keeping it locked. Yet tonight, it was open just a crack. The whispers grew louder as he approached. He hesitated for a moment, but curiosity drove him forward. Without thinking, he pushed the door open a little further. The sight that greeted him was unsettling. Anastasia was standing in the middle of the room, her back to him, staring at something in the corner. Her body was tense, as if she were listening intently to something that he couldn't hear. She wasn't alone. There, at the far end of the room, stood a shadowy figure, tall and indistinct, but its presence was chilling. The figure didn't move, didn't speak, and didn't even acknowledge his presence. It was as though it wasn't even aware of him. Anastasia spoke, but her voice wasn't the same. It was quieter, raspier, almost as if she were speaking to herself. "He's getting closer," she muttered, barely audible. "I can't run anymore. He'll find me." His breath caught in his throat, and his legs almost gave way beneath him. What was happening here? Who was she talking about? And why did she seem so distant? Just as he took a step forward, the figure in the corner vanished without a sound. Anastasia's head jerked around to face him, her eyes wide with shock. The door slammed shut behind him, and everything went eerily quiet. She blinked at him for a moment, as if trying to process what she had just seen. And then, as if nothing had happened at all, she forced a smile, though it was strained and uneasy. "Sorry," she said softly, almost apologetically. I didn't realize you were there. I must have been dreaming." Her words didn't make sense. She had been wide awake just moments ago, talking to someone or something that wasn't there. But before he could ask her any questions, she quickly turned away, moving to close the door and lock it. He could see the change in her demeanor, a sudden defensiveness, as if she was trying to keep him out. "Everything's fine," she insisted, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm fine. It's nothing. Please, just go back to your apartment." He stood there, frozen for a moment, unsure what to make of the situation. The unease that had settled deep in his gut only grew stronger. This wasn't normal. Something was very wrong, but she wasn't going to let him in on the secret. Not yet. The next few days were unsettling, to say the least. Anastasia avoided him at all costs. Every time he tried to make small talk or ask her about the strange events, she would either change the subject or come up with some excuse to retreat to her apartment. The door was always locked, and she never once ventured out at the usual hours. She became a ghost in her own space, a presence that lingered only in the brief moments when they crossed paths in the hallway. But the sounds didn't stop. If anything, they intensified. The whispers grew louder, and sometimes late at night, he would hear the faint sound of someone crying, a deep, guttural sobbing that sent chills down his spine. He tried to ignore it, but his curiosity gnawed at him. He couldn't just let it go. There was something hidden in those walls, something he needed to uncover. One evening, unable to shake the feeling of unease, he decided to take action. He wasn't sure what he was hoping to find, but he knew that he couldn't stay in the dark any longer. He waited until late, well past midnight, when everything in the building was still. Then, he quietly slipped out of his apartment and made his way to Anastasia's door. This time, he didn't hesitate. He knew he couldn't keep playing it safe. He needed answers. With a glance over his shoulder, he reached for the door handle, and to his surprise, it turned. It wasn't locked. Heart pounding in his chest, he slowly pushed the door open. The apartment was dark, but the faint glow of the city lights outside filtered through the window, casting eerie shadows across the room. The apartment was eerily quiet, save for the soft hum of the refrigerator. He stepped inside, barely making a sound. As he moved deeper into the apartment, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The hair on the back of his neck stood up, and his breath hitched in his throat. Everything felt off. It was as if the room itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Then he saw it, something that sent his heart racing. In the far corner of the room, just beneath the window, there was a small table covered with a thick layer of dust. On the table was an assortment of items, photographs, papers, and notebooks scattered haphazardly across the surface. But what caught his attention was a large, leather-bound journal that lay open in the center. It was Anastasia's handwriting. His eyes scanned the page, reading the words that seemed to jump out at him. He's getting closer. I can't keep running. He'll find me. I have to stay hidden. I have to pretend I'm someone else. The words were desperate, filled with fear. It was clear that whoever she wasn't the person she had let on. There was more to this story than he could have ever imagined. He quickly turned the page, his hands trembling as he read more. I can't let him find out. Not yet. I'll keep him close. I'll make him believe I'm just a simple girl, that I'm normal. He won't suspect anything. But if he ever finds out, it's all over. He'll destroy everything I've worked for. The words were unsettling, but what really caught is, I was the last sentence. I've done this before. I know how to manipulate them. He's just another target. His breath caught in his throat as the weight of the words settled in. She wasn't who she said she was. She was hiding something dark, something dangerous. And he had been a part of it all along. Before he could process what he just read, a sound behind him made him freeze. The floorboard creaked, and he spun around to find Anastasia standing in the doorway, her eyes wide with fear. You shouldn't have come in here, she whispered, her voice barely audible. The journal, the words, the lies, it all came rushing back. He had just uncovered the truth, but now he had no idea what to do with it. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. Everything he had believed about her, everything he had thought was real, had been a lie. He stood frozen in place, staring at her. She was no longer the shy, sweet girl he had met weeks ago. She was a stranger, a dangerous stranger. Anastasia's expression faltered for a moment, but then, with a soft laugh that sent chills down his spine, she took a step forward. You've been asking too many questions, she said, her voice now cold and distant. And that's not something I can allow. Before he could react, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, silver object, a key. With a smooth motion, she pressed it into his hand. It's over now. You're too far in. I can't let you walk away from this. His fingers closed around the key, and for a moment, everything seemed to stand still. The weight of the situation was becoming unbearable. The truth was unraveling before him. But what was he supposed to do with it? Don't worry, she continued, her eyes narrowing. You'll understand soon enough. And then, just as quickly as she appeared, she turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving him standing there, the journal still open on the table, the truth staring him in the face. The key felt cold in his hand, a sharp contrast to the heat of the questions swirling in his mind. Anastasia's words echoed in his head as he stood there in the dimly lit apartment, paralyzed by the gravity of the situation. You'll understand soon enough. What did that even mean? What had he stumbled into? He glanced down at the journal again, the pages stained with the ink of secrets and lies. The words seemed to have a life of their own, pulling him deeper into the mystery. but it was the key she had given him that now consumed him. It was small, silver, unassuming, but it held the promise of answers he desperately needed but feared at the same time. His heart raced as he left the apartment, the key heavy in his pocket, the journal tucked beneath his arm. The hallway was eerily quiet, just the softness of the building's old plumbing and the faint creak of floorboards underfoot. Anastasia's door was shut, but now it felt different, like it was hiding something far worse than he could have imagined. He didn't know what to do next. Should he confront her? Should he leave it all behind and forget everything? But as he stood in the dim light of the hallway, the weight of the key pressed against his chest, he knew there was no turning back now. He needed to understand why she had come into his life, why she had manipulated him, and, most of all, why she had chosen him as her target. Later that night, unable to shake the feeling of unease, he found himself walking the streets, lost in thought. The air was thick with the tension of unanswered questions. What did she want from him? Was he just another pawn in her game, or had he unwittingly become something more? His mind raced as he replayed their interactions. Everything had seemed so normal, so perfect until now. He couldn't let it go. He had to know what she was hiding. As the hours passed, he found himself back at his apartment. He hadn't even realized how far he had walked. With a deep breath, he sat down at his desk and pulled out the journal. It was still open to the page with her words. "I've done this before. I know how to manipulate them. He's just another target." His fingers trembled as he traced the words, trying to make sense of it all. But there was no sense to be made. She had been playing a game, and he had been the unwitting participant. But why him? What made him different from all the others? He thought back to the first time they had met. She had approached him in the bar, asked why he was so sad. She had seemed so genuine, so caring. But now he realized that it was all part of her plan. Her questions, her smiles, they had all been calculated, designed to reel him in. He flipped through the journal, scanning the pages for more clues. His eyes stopped on a new entry, one that was dated only a few days ago. He's getting too close. I need to move quickly. If he suspects anything, it'll all fall apart. His heart skipped a beat. Was she talking about him? Had he unknowingly crossed a line? He could feel the walls closing around him, the realization that he had become part of something far bigger than himself. And then, as if the universe had conspired against him, there was a knock at the door. His body tensed. Who could it be at this hour? He stood frozen for a moment, unsure what to do. Should he answer it? Should he pretend he was asleep? He glanced at the clock. It was nearly midnight. The knock came again, more insistent this time. He walked cautiously to the door, his heart pounding in his chest. Slowly, he turned the handle and opened it, bracing himself for whatever waited on the other side. To his surprise, it was Anastasia. But she wasn't standing alone. She had someone with her, a man, tall and imposing, with a dark, unreadable expression. She looked at him, her face hardening as she stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. "We need to talk," she said, her voice cold and emotionless. He glanced at the man standing behind her, unsure of who he was or what his role was in all of this. Anastasia turned to man and gave him a brief nod, as if signaling for him to wait. Then she focused her attention on him, her eyes sharp and calculating. "You've been asking too many questions," she said, her voice low. "And that's not something I can allow." He took a step back, suddenly feeling like a mouse in a trap. "I don't know what you want from me," he said, his voice trembling. "But I'm not going to play along with your games anymore." She smirked. "Oh, but you already have, haven't you? You just didn't realize it yet." The man behind her stepped forward then, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the room. There was a moment of silence before he spoke, his voice deep and gravelly. "Now, you've crossed a line," he said, his tone menacing. "And we don't like it when people start poking around in things they don't understand." The chill in the room deepened as the man took another step forward, his gaze locked onto the protagonist. Anastasia's eyes flicked between the two of them, and for a brief second, she seemed almost regretful. But it quickly vanished, replaced by a cold, unreadable expression. "This is the point of no return," she said softly. And in that moment, everything seemed to shift. The truth he had been chasing, the truth that had seemed so close just a moment ago, now felt distant, almost unreachable. He had thought he was in control. But now, he realized that he had been playing their game all along, and the stakes were higher than he could have ever imagined. The tension in the room was unbearable. The man behind Anastasia stepped forward again, his presence filling the small apartment, casting a shadow over everything. The faint hum of the street outside felt far away, irrelevant, as if this moment was the only thing that mattered. Anastasia's cold gaze never left him, her lips curving into a half-smile that felt more like a warning than anything else. It was a smile of someone who had all the control, someone who knew the game better than he ever could. And yet, there was a flicker of something else in her eyes, something he couldn't quite place. Was it regret? Or perhaps guilt? He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but I'm not afraid of you," he said, his voice coming out more confident than he felt. His hands were shaking, but he clenched them into fists, pushing back the fear that threatened to overtake him. Anastasia's eyes narrowed as she tilted her head slightly. "Oh, I'm not trying to scare you. I'm just trying to make sure you understand your place. You've been digging too deep into things you don't understand, and now you have a choice." "A choice?" He raised an eyebrow. "What are you talking about? What have you been doing?" The man behind Anastasia stepped closer, and the air seemed to grow colder. "You're not going to get answers from her," he said, his voice low and intimidating. "Not unless you stop asking questions. Stop digging into things that don't concern you. Otherwise what?" he asked, his voice hardening. "What are you going to do to me?" Anastasia finally broke her gaze, her lips curling into a smile that was both chilling and sad. "You've already met the people who are going to help us clean up your mess. That's what this is all about, you know? Keeping the game clean. There's no room for mistakes." He swallowed, his pulse quickening. This was bigger than he thought. They were playing a game, one that he hadn't fully understood until now. And he had no idea how deep it went, how much further they were willing to push him. But something told him it was too late to back out. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice quiet, barely above a whisper. "Who are you, really?" Anastasia's eyes flicked to the man behind her, who had been standing still, watching them with an almost bored expression. He looked like someone who had seen this all before, someone who wasn't fazed by anything. Anastasia sighed, as if considering her words carefully. "The truth?" she said, her voice soft but heavy with meaning. "You're not going to get the truth from me, at least not the one you want. The truth is complicated. We all have our roles to play, and your role in the story, well, it's not over yet." The words hung in the air, leaving a trail of confusion and dread in their wake. The protagonist felt like he was drowning in them. He had no idea what she meant, but he knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning of something far darker than he had imagined. "I don't know what you're trying to say," he muttered, backing away slowly. His mind raced. He needed to think, needed to find a way out. But all the doors seemed to be closing around him. Anastasia stepped forward, blocking his path. "What you need to understand is that you don't have a choice. We've already decided for you. This is who you are now. You'll learn to accept it." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. His mind reeled. "I'll never accept this," he shot back, his voice firm despite the fear creeping up his spine. But she only smiled again, a cold, calculating smile. "That's the first mistake you're making. Denial only makes it worse." The man behind her moved toward the door, his footsteps heavy and deliberate. "This is where it ends for you," he said, his voice cold as ice. "You wanted answers, but now you have them. The question is, what are you going to do with them?" As he spoke, the protagonist felt a strange sense of finality, as though his fate was already sealed. There was no turning back, no escaping this twisted reality that Anastasia and her mysterious accomplice had created. He was trapped in their world now. The man opened the door and gestured for Anastasia to leave. She glanced back at him one last time, her expression unreadable. "Think about what I said," she told him, her voice cold, distant. "We're always watching, and you will be, too." With that, she stepped out, leaving him standing alone in the apartment. The door clicked shut behind them, the sound final, suffocating. The The silence that followed was deafening, and for a long moment he didn't know what to do. His heart was racing, his mind whirling. He felt exposed, vulnerable. It was as though everything he had known, his apartment, his life, his very reality, had been turned upside down. The truth was elusive, just out of his reach. But he was determined to find it. He had to. There was no way he could live with himself if he didn't. And so, with resolve hardening in his chest, he walked to his desk and pulled out the journal again. He had no choice now but to dig deeper, to find the answers. There were no more distractions, no more games. It was time to uncover the truth, whatever it might cost him. But little did he know, the truth would come at a far greater price than he could ever imagine. The silence in the apartment was stifling. It pressed in on him, heavy and suffocating, as if the very walls were conspiring to keep him from finding any peace. He couldn't shake the words Anastasia had left him with. "We're always watching." That phrase repeated itself over and over in his mind, growing more ominous with every passing second. He ran his fingers over the pages of the journal, but the words seemed foreign to him now, as if they belonged to someone else. His focus wavered, his thoughts fragmented. What had happened to his life? What had started as a simple attempt to escape the pain of a broken relationship had spiraled into something unrecognizable. Nothing made sense anymore. His thoughts were interrupted by the soft buzz of his phone, vibrating against the desk. He looked at the screen, his pulse quickening as he saw an unknown number. He hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello." The voice on the other end was low, distorted, almost mechanical. "You're getting too close," it said, the words sharp and clipped. "Stop before it's too late." The phone went dead before he could respond. He stared at the screen, his heart pounding in his chest. Who was that? How did they know what he was doing? His thoughts raced, but the more he tried to piece it together, the more tangled the web became. Anastasia's cryptic warning echoed in his mind. "We're always watching." Who were they? What did they want from him? Without thinking, he grabbed his jacket and rushed out of the apartment, determined to confront whatever force was behind all this. The air outside was cold, the streets quieter than usual, but there was no comfort in the stillness. His mind was buzzing, filled with questions that seemed to have no answers. He made his way to the coffee shop where he'd first met Anastasia. Maybe, just maybe, there would be someone who could shed some light on what was happening. The barista who had been working that night was there, wiping down the counter as he noticed the protagonist's approach. "You look different," the barista said, raising an eyebrow. "Everything okay?" He hesitated. Could he trust this person? Could he even trust anyone anymore? "Something's going on," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need to know what's really happening. With her. With all of it." The barista's expression shifted, eyes flickering with something that resembled hesitation or perhaps fear. "You shouldn't be asking questions about her," he said, his tone dropping. "Trust me, it's better if you just leave it alone." The protagonist took a step closer, his voice firm. "Why? What's going on? Who is she really?" The barista glanced around, as if checking to see if anyone was listening, before leaning in. "I can't tell you much," he whispered, "but she's not who she says she is. No one is. You're not the first, you know, and you won't be the last." The words hit him like a slap to the face. "What do you mean? Who else is she?" Before the barista could respond, the door to the coffee shop opened with a soft chime. He quickly pulled back, signaling that their conversation was over. "Look, you need to go," he said, his voice now sharp. "Just forget about her. Forget about all of it." The protagonist stood frozen for a moment, unsure what to make of the encounter. He wanted answers. He needed to know the truth. But the more he pushed, the more everyone seemed to retreat into silence, as if the truth was something too dangerous to confront. With a sense of dread creeping up his spine, he left the coffee shop and made his way back to his apartment. It wasn't just Anastasia that was hiding something. It was everyone. Every conversation seemed to lead him down another dark, twisted path. As he stood in front of his apartment door, a thought crossed his mind. Maybe he had made a mistake. Maybe he was better off never knowing the truth. But deep down, he knew he couldn't stop now. He couldn't turn back. His fingers hovered over the doorknob, and for a moment he hesitated. The silence on the other side of the door seemed to call to him, a promise of more answers, but perhaps also more danger. He had no choice but to push forward. The moment he stepped inside, a chill ran down his spine. Something was different. The atmosphere was heavier than before, the air thick with tension. He scanned the room, his eyes immediately drawn to the open drawer of his desk. Something was off. He walked toward the desk slowly, his heart pounding as he pulled open the drawer. Inside, he found the journal, but there was something else mixed in with the pages. A photograph. His breath caught in his throat as he looked at it. The photo was blurry, taken from a distance, but it was unmistakable. It was of him, and in the background, standing just out of focus, was Anastasia. Her face was hidden in shadow, but it was clearly her. Who had taken this photo? And why? His mind raced. The implications were terrifying. It wasn't just that Anastasia had been watching him. She had been watching him from the very beginning, from the moment they had met. And someone else had been watching, too. The protagonist's hands shook as he dropped the photo back into the drawer, his mind reeling. He couldn't keep ignoring the truth. Whoever was behind this, whoever was pulling the strings, was closer than he realized. He had no idea what to do next. But one thing was certain. There was no going back now. The night stretched on, its heavy silence suffocating as the protagonist sat in his chair, staring at the photograph. His mind was racing, trying to make sense of everything. But the more he thought about it, the more tangled the web became. How long had he been living in this lie? How long had she been watching him? Had she ever been honest with him? The question swirled in his mind, growing louder with every passing second. The photograph lay in front of him, a stark reminder that his world was far darker than he had ever imagined. He picked it up again, inspecting it more closely. The blurry edges, the way her face was hidden. It felt like a message. But what was it trying to say? He couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something crucial, something that was just out of reach. The image of Anastasia standing in the background, watching him, seemed to mock him. All this time, he thought he was in control, that he had the power to make his own choices. But now, it felt like everything had been orchestrated from the very beginning. The silence of the apartment pressing on him, and the eerie sensation of being watched returned, creeping into the corners of his mind. He stood up abruptly, unable to sit still any longer. He needed answers, now. His first instinct was to go to her apartment, but something held him back. Was it too risky? What if she was there, waiting for him? What if she knew he was on to her? He couldn't afford to make a mistake, but he had to act. He couldn't just let this go. Not anymore. The protagonist grabbed his jacket and left his apartment. The chill of the night air hit him like a slap, but it did nothing to clear his thoughts. His heart pounded in his chest as he made his way to Anastasia's door. It was time to confront her, to get the truth, whatever it was. When he reached her door, he hesitated. His hand hovered over the doorknob for a moment, and then, as if on instinct, he pushed it open. The door creaked loudly, echoing in the otherwise silent hallway. The apartment inside was eerily still, the soft glow of the streetlights filtering through the blinds. It felt like no one had lived here for weeks. The furniture was covered with sheets, dust settling on every surface, as if everything had been abandoned in a hurry. He stepped inside, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. His eyes scanned the room, searching for any sign of her. There was nothing, no evidence of a struggle, no clues to explain her sudden disappearance. But the sense of unease lingered in the air. He moved through the apartment slowly, methodically. Every corner, every drawer, every cabinet was examined. And then, as he opened the closet door, his eyes landed on something that made his blood run cold. It was a small notebook, tucked away in the back of the closet, hidden under a pile of clothes. He pulled it out, his hands trembling as he flipped it open. The pages were filled with notes, detailed observations, descriptions of his every move. Every moment they'd spent together was documented in painstaking detail, as if it were some kind of report. There were even times and dates. His heart skipped a beat as he read through the entries, each one more chilling than the last. It was clear now. She hadn't just been watching him. She had been studying him. Every word, every glance, every movement had been scrutinized, dissected, analyzed. And he hadn't even known. The final page was the most disturbing. It was a list of names, and beside each one was a date. The last name on the list was his. He felt a wave of nausea rise in his throat. This wasn't just about him and Anastasia. This was part of something much bigger, something he couldn't yet understand. But the more he looked at the names, the more he realized the terrifying truth. He wasn't the first, and he wouldn't be the last. The notebook slipped from his hands, falling to the floor with a soft thud. He stood there for a moment, paralyzed by the realization of what this all meant. Whoever she was, whatever her game was, it wasn't over. And now it was his turn to play. The protagonist stood frozen in the middle of Anastasia's apartment, the weight of the notebook's contents pressing down on him. His fingers curled around the edges of the page, his heart racing. The implications were clear. She had been keeping track of more than just him. The names in that book, each with a date beside them, were a record, a pattern, a history of people she had manipulated, used, and discarded. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating, as he processed a horror what had just uncovered. She hadn't just disappeared. She had planned it all, every step, every move, and he was just another chapter in her twisted tale. He kneeled down and retrieved the notebook from the floor. There was no time to waste. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. He couldn't afford to let her slip through his fingers. His life, as he had known it, was over. Nothing would ever be the same. The apartment was silent, its emptiness swallowing every thought he tried to form. His eyes scanned the room again, lingering on the details, the untouched furniture, the neatly arranged objects. It looked as if Anastasia had planned her exit meticulously. It wasn't just a disappearance. It was a carefully orchestrated escape. His gaze shifted to the closet, where the notebook had been hidden. Was it the only thing she had left behind? He moved over to it, pushing clothes aside, hoping to find something, anything that would shed light on her motives. But as he searched, he found nothing more. No photos, no personal effects. Just a cold, empty space of a life that had been discarded. A sinking feeling settled in his stomach. The more he uncovered, the more he realized how little he truly knew about her. Who was she? What was her purpose? And how many others had there been before him? The list of names in the notebook haunted him, each one representing another victim, another life she had infiltrated. He needed to find out more. He needed to track her down. The protagonist walked out of her apartment and into the dimly lit hallway. His steps echoed off the walls, a reminder that he was alone in this. The weight of the situation pressed on him with every movement, but there was no turning back now. His mind raced as he thought about the next step. He could go to the police, but what would he say? My neighbor disappeared, and I found a notebook with a list of names? They would laugh him off, dismissing him as paranoid. He couldn't risk it. He had to do this on his own. The first thing he needed was more information. The list in the notebook had been a start, but he needed to know more about the other names. Who were they? What had happened to them? Why had Anastasia targeted them? He pulled out his phone and opened the list from a notebook. He stared at the names, trying to make sense of it all. The first name, a woman he didn't recognize, had a date next to it. He tapped the name into his phone's search engine, hoping to find something. After a few moments, a news article popped up. Local woman found dead under suspicious circumstances. Police are investigating. His stomach twisted as he read the headline. The woman on the list was dead. The article detailed how her body had been found in an abandoned building, but there was no explanation as to what had happened. The police had no leads, no suspects. The woman's life had ended, and there had been no one to notice. The protagonist clicked on the next name, his hands trembling as he searched for the truth. Each name revealed a new layer of deception, a new tragedy. He saw patterns emerging, deaths, disappearances, people vanishing without a trace. And it all pointed back to her. Anastasia had been targeting these people, and now he realized he was next. The protagonist's thoughts were interrupted by the sudden ring of his phone. He glanced at the screen and saw an unknown number. His heart skipped a beat as he answered. "Hello." A voice, cold and unfamiliar, answered on the other end. "You've been looking for answers, haven't you?" The voice was smooth, almost like a whisper, sending a chill down his spine. "What do you want?" The protagonist's voice was hoarse, his pulse quickening. "We know what you found. We know you're getting close. But you won't find her. Not in time, anyway." The voice paused, as if savoring the words. "You're not the first to search, and you won't be the last." The line went dead. The protagonist stood still, his hand gripping the phone tightly. He felt the weight of those words settle deep into his chest. He wasn't just fighting against Anastasia. He was up against something much larger, a network, a group, a conspiracy, and it was hunting him now. He couldn't let fear control him. Not now. He had to push forward. The truth was just within his grasp, and he wasn't going to stop until he had it. As he walked down the dimly lit street, the reality of the situation settled in. He was being hunted, but he wasn't going down without a fight. He wasn't going to let Anastasia or anyone else take control of his life. He had to find her. He had to stop this. And he was willing to go to any lengths to do it. As he walked through the dark streets, the weight of his discoveries pressing heavily on his mind. Each step felt like it was leading him deeper into a web of deceit and danger that he was only beginning to understand. But one thing was clear. Anastasia had been playing him from the start, and it was time to confront her. He couldn't shake the image of the list from the notebook. Each name had led him down a trail of dead ends and mysterious disappearances, and now it all pointed back to one thing. Anastasia was not just a con artist. She was part of something much bigger, a part of something that spanned years and reached far beyond the city's limits. And he had to stop it, no matter what. His mind raced as he thought back to the phone call from the mysterious voice. They knew he was getting closer. They knew he was digging too deep, but they didn't know what he had uncovered. They didn't know he was ready to fight back. He reached the building where he believed Anastasia was hiding. It was an old, run-down warehouse on the outskirts of town, the kind of place that no one would think to look twice at. The area was silent, deserted, and the darkness swallowed everything in its path. He could feel the cold seeping into his bones as he approached the entrance. His heart hammered in his chest. This was it, the moment he'd been waiting for. He wasn't sure what he was going to find inside, but he was prepared to face it head-on. Taking a deep breath, he pushed open the door. The hinges creaked as they gave way, the sound echoing through the empty space. He stepped inside, his senses on high alert. The air was thick with dust and the smell of old wood. He could barely make out shapes in the shadows, but there was no sign of Anastasia. His eyes scanned the room, looking for any hint of her presence. And then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw it. A faint light flickering in the distance. Without hesitation, he moved toward it, his footsteps echoing in the stillness. As he got closer, he saw a figure standing in front of a table, her back turned to him. It was her, Anastasia. "Anastasia!" he called out, his voice low but urgent. She turned slowly, her eyes narrowing as she locked onto him. For a moment, there was nothing but silence between them. The tension in the air was palpable, like a string pulled taut, ready to snap. "You really thought you could find me?" she asked, her voice cold and calm, as if she were discussing something trivial. "You've been chasing shadows, trying to piece together a puzzle you don't even understand." "I know what you've been doing," he said, his voice steady but filled with determination. "I know about the others. The list, the lives you've destroyed." Her expression faltered for a brief second, but then she regained her composure, a sly smile curling on her lips. "You think you know? You think you've uncovered everything? You're just a small part of a much bigger picture. This was never about you. It was always about the bigger game. And you, my dear, were just another pawn." He clenched his fists, anger surging through him. "You manipulated everyone. Used them. And for what? Power? Money? What's your endgame, Anastasia?" She tilted her head, considering his question for a moment. "Power is just means to an end. Money is nothing more than a tool. The real game, though, is control. Control over people's lives, their choices, their futures. I've played the game for so long, I've become part of it. And now it's your turn to play." He took a step forward, his resolve hardening. I'm done being your pawn. Anastasia's smile widened. You don't get it, do you? You were never in control. You never were. And now, you're too far in to back out. You're already tangled in my web, and there's no way out. He stood his ground. I don't need to back out. I've already found the truth. And I'm going to make sure the world knows who you really are. For a moment, her eyes flashed with something. Fear, maybe, or something deeper, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. She took a step back, her posture changing, as if preparing for something. You think it's that simple? She asked, her voice low, almost threatening. You can't just walk away from this. There are forces beyond your understanding that are invested in this game. And if you think you can stop me, you're sadly mistaken. He stepped forward again, this time more forcefully. I'm not afraid of you. Anastasia's smile faltered for just a second, but then she recovered, as if she had been playing a different game all along. The air around them was thick with tension, a storm waiting to break. He could see the danger in her eyes, the cold, calculated nature of someone who had spent years mastering the art of manipulation. But in that moment, he knew something she didn't. The truth was on his side, and no matter how hard she tried to twist it, he would expose her for what she was. No more games. No more lies. He reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone. The police will be here soon. They'll know everything. Her face tightened, and for the first time, he saw her mask crack. You think you've won, she spat. You've only scratched the surface. Before he could respond, she turned and bolted into the shadows, disappearing into the darkness. The protagonist took off after her, his heart pounding in his chest. He wasn't going to let her get away. Not this time. Not after everything she had done. The chase led him through the maze of the warehouse, his breath coming in short gasps. He was close. He could feel it. But then, a sharp noise from behind caused him to turn. A flash of movement. It was too late. The lights went out. The darkness swallowed him whole.